Girivanadhari Jaya Gopi Janavalabha Girivanadhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Jamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Vallabha Girivanadhari Jaya Gopi Vallabha Girivanadhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Dhanavalabha Girivanadhari Jaya Gopi Dhanavalabha Girivanadhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Srila Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Pavaraja Gacharya Stata Shat Shri Srimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Om. Hare Krishna, dear devotees, please accept my obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. We are going to read from the 6th canto today, chapter 18, verse 43. The chapter is entitled DT Vows to Kill King Indra. Text 43. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. I'll recite and then go through the word for word translation. Pratishrutam dadat. I remember the meter earlier, now I forget it. Pratishrutam. Pratishrutam dadamiti vachasthana mrisha bhavet vadham narhati chandropi tatredam upakalpate. Word for word translation by Srila Prabhupada of Sanskrit into English. Pratishrutam, promised. Dadami, I shall give. Iti, thus. Vachaha, statement. Tat, that. Na, not. Mrisha, false. Bhavet, can be. Vadham, killing. Na, not. Arhati, is suitable. Cha, and. Indraha, Indra. Api, also. Tatra, in that connection. Idam, this. Upakalpate, is suitable. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. I promised to give her a benediction, and this promise cannot be violated. But Indra does not deserve to be killed. In these circumstances, the solution I have is quite suitable. Purport. Kashyapa Muni concluded, quote, Diti is eager to have a son who can kill Indra, since she is a woman, after all, and is not very intelligent. I shall train her in such a way that instead of always thinking of how to kill Indra, she will become a Vaishnava, a devotee of Krishna. If she agrees to follow the rules and regulations of the Vaishnava principles, the unclean core of her heart will certainly be cleansed. End quote. So Prabhupada here very kindly gives us a concise reiteration of Kashyapa Muni's inner thought process. And Prabhupada gives it to us in this quote here as Kashyapa Muni's inner thoughts. Cheto Darpanam Marjanam. This is the process of devotional service. Anyone can be purified by following the principles of devotional service in Krishna consciousness. For Krishna consciousness is so powerful that it can purify even the dirtiest class of men and transform them into the topmost Vaishnavas. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement aims at this purpose. Narottam Das Thakur says, Vajendra Nandana Ye, Sachi Sutta Haila Se, Balarama Ha Ila Nitai, Dina Hina Yata Chila, Hari Name Udharila, Tara Sakshi Jaghai Madhai. The appearance of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in this Kali Yuga is especially meant to deliver the fallen souls, who are always planning something for material enjoyment. He gave the people of this age the advantage of being able to chant the Hare Krishna mantra and thus become fully pure, free from all material contamination. Once one becomes a pure Vaishnava, he transcends all material conceptions of life. Thus, Kashyapa Muni tried to transform his wife into a Vaishnavi so that she might give up the idea of killing Indra. He wanted both her and her sons to be purified so that they would be fit to become pure Vaishnavas. Of course, sometimes a practitioner deviates from the Vaishnava principles, and there is a chance that he may fall down. But Kashyapa Muni thought that even if one falls while practicing the Vaishnava principles, he is still not a loser. Even a fallen Vaishnava is eligible for better results, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. Swalpam apyasya dharmasya trayate mahato bhayat. Even practicing the Vaishnava principles to a small extent can save one from the greatest danger of material existence. Thus, Kashyapa Muni planned to instruct his wife Diti to become a Vaishnava because he wanted to save the life of Indra. Translation again. I promised to give her a benediction, and this promise cannot be violated. But Indra does not deserve to be killed. In these circumstances, the solution I have is quite suitable. Om Ajnana-timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna devotees. It's been a long time since I have given Srimad Bhagavatam class to Gita Nagari. The last verse I gave a class on was in the fifth canto, so it's been a while to refresh myself, and for anybody who is listening that has not followed this pastime recently, what is happening here is that Diti wants vengeance against King Indra, and her solution or her plan to get vengeance on Indra is to conceive a son who will kill Indra. And so she's serving her wife, or excuse me, her husband, Kashyapa Muni, very diligently to get a benediction from him to conceive a son that will kill Indra. And in this verse, we hear the inner thoughts of Kashyapa Muni to how to deal with this situation that he's in because he has integrity. He wants to fulfill the desires of his wife for serving him so nicely. At the same time, he knows that Indra doesn't deserve to be killed. And so his solution is to give DT instructions that will actually purify her heart of material desires to practice becoming a Vaishnava, a Vaishnavi. And in this way, she will give up her material desire to get vengeance on King Indra. And the topic that I wanted to speak about in relation to this pastime is grief. I have been learning a lot about grief and practicing mourning myself. I recently completed a course with Karuna Care headed by Rambaru Devidasi. I completed that course and I learned a lot. And also, the anniversary of my father's death was on Thursday. And so, grief has been on my mind and I've been actively engaging with it. And through my class, I'll try to show systematically that it is, as bhakti yogis, it is actually in our interest to know something about grief and to have some knowledge about it and to engage with it as a catalyst to aiding in our purification in the path of bhakti. And I will show you how this pastime actually that we're reading from is directly related to grief. And so let's start with a definition. What is grief? So grief, as we experience it here in the material world, is the collection of emotions, thoughts, and physical symptoms related to a loss. The collective emotions, thoughts, and physical symptoms related to a loss. And that loss can be related to literally anything. The most common conception that we have of grief is usually related to the loss of a loved one, the loss of a parent or a sibling or a spouse or a child or a cousin or an uncle or a friend. Those are the most common references that we have to human grief because they're very intense and they are kind of in our face. However, there are many other forms of grief because it's related to a loss, and we are mortal. We have mortal bodies, and the, the material world is full of loss. It's inevitable that we lose things, including our bodies. All of this is actually designed in this way to bring us back to spiritual consciousness, back to the spiritual world. But as I said, the loss can really relate to anything. It could be something abstract or subtle as well. For example, the loss of youth. Everybody, everyone's body is growing, and everyone's body will perish. So the loss of youth. If we experienced abuse or trauma in our youth, we could have lost. We could have lost our innocence. We could have lost our ability to be children. Sometimes we're forced to act like adults, even though we're still in adolescent bodies. If you get married, you deal with the loss of aspects of your independence, and it might. I think you get the point. It can be variegated quite extensively, this grief, and ultimately, from the bhakti yoga perspective, grief is simply a symptom of having a body, having a mortal body. Inevitably, there's loss, and inevitably, there are thoughts, emotions, and physical reactions to those losses. The more attached we are to what was lost, the more intense we experience the grief. And actually, the English word grief, the etymology of the word is quite interesting, actually. Um, the Latin root of the word grief is gravis, which means heavy, and the Proto-Indo-European connection to Sanskrit is guere, and that sounds a lot like guru, and Srila Prabhupada translates the word guru sometimes as heavy, and so through that connecting the dots, we can see how grief can actually act as a guru for us to bring us closer to Krishna if we consciously choose to turn our consciousness towards it. Now, someone could say, Dear Nagaraj Nitai Prabhu, doesn't Krishna say in Bhagavad Gita that Arjuna was mourning for something and experiencing grief for something that was not worthy of grief? And my response is yes, absolutely. And there's a lot of nuance to that as well. I think it's important that we look at that verse and related verses and look at the context as well. So, Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 11, Krishna says to Arjuna, while speaking learned words, you are mourning for what is not worthy of grief. Those who are wise lament neither for the living or for the dead. Now, mourning, I should clarify, Mourning. That word is a verb. So grief is a noun, it's a thing. And mourning is a verb. It's the action in which you process and express grief. So Krishna is saying here that Arjuna is expressing his grief, but he's pointing out to him that the grief is misplaced. Krishna is not saying that grief in and of itself is bad or unworthy or meant to be ignored. Krishna is saying that the thing in which Arjuna is placing his grief, the object of his grief, is inaccurate. It's not in the right spot. Not that grief is bad in and of itself. And the word, by the way, grief is mentioned about 10 times in the Bhagavad Gita, and I think over 100 times in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And the Sanskrit word is shokam. And in this particular verse, Bhagavad Gita 2:11, it's a little bit different. The root is the same, but it's shocha instead of shokam. But the root is the same, and Prabhupada translates it as grief. So my point is that Krishna is pointing out that in and of itself, a grief is not the bad thing. It's where is the grief being placed? What is the object of grief? Just like we speak about love, Krishna, ideally for us, is the object of love, but we repose the love. We have the love, and Krishna is the object of love, the aim of the love. And so, in a similar way, we experience grief, but what is the object of grief? What is the purpose, or what is the catalyst or impetus of the grief? And we see actually in the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Krishna book that the gopis and other residents of Vrindavan, they experience grief very intensely in separation from Krishna. Now, their grief is purely transcendental, and we want to work to that point. But the point I'm trying to make here is that in order to get to that point, it helps us to know the grief that we experience here in the material world. Hmm. So another aspect of this is that Arjuna was misplacing his grief, which needs some adjustment and some purification. However, another hugely important fact is that Arjuna was 100% aware of his grief. It was misplaced grief, but he was also 100% aware of it. He was consciously engaged with it. And we see this in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 8. Arjuna says, I can find no means to drive away this grief which is drying up my senses. I will not be able to dispel it, even if I win a prosperous, unrivaled kingdom on earth with sovereignty like the demigods in heaven. So Arjuna is saying here that he's aware of his grief. He's consciously engaged with it, and he's trying to find a solution to it. And he's thinking he's bargaining more or less. He's thinking of material solutions to this material grief that he's experiencing. And the main point I want to point out is that he is consciously engaged with it. He's consciously aware of it. And again, the word used in this verse is shokam, which is very important. We'll bring that point up in a minute. Shokam, Prabhupada translates as grief. Sometimes he also translates it as lamentation. I think there may be one or two other English words Prabhupada translates it into as well. But anyway, back to the point that Arjuna is consciously aware of his grief, which is a huge contextual point to consider, because I apologize to anybody if this is shocking or, repulsive to hear, but unfortunately, we do not live in a human society today. We live in human bodies. We are raised by other human beings. We engage in a apparently human society, but the leaders of society in Kali Yuga, they're all asuras. They are all atheistic. They are all systematically, either consciously or unconsciously, or some mixture of both, they are all systematically preventing and destroying Brahminical culture, which means knowledge. They are destroying and preventing higher knowledge. And so, the even from a material perspective, um, the upper stratum of human culture is not there, it's absent. So what to speak of spiritual intelligence or spiritual culture, even just upper levels of material human culture is not there. It's absent. And so the knowledge about grief is not there, and the knowledge and acceptance of what grief is and how to engage with it by mourning, that's generally not practiced at all amongst the general population. I mean, most of the time, to hear about it, to engage with it, people usually, I mean, if they're in a spiritual community, they might hopefully engage with a spiritual leader who knows something of grief, and they can gauge that way. But most people, the average person, if they ever hear about this concept and if they ever engage with it, it's through a psychologist, a therapist, or something of that nature, which, in my opinion, in a normal human society that is led by genuine Brahmins, there would be no need for that, because grief would be more or less common knowledge, and it would be engaged with, consciously engaged with in a healthy way. And as I said, that is practically absent nowadays. And if we think about Arjuna's context, he was a bona fide kshatriya. He was living in a society in which Varnashram Dharma was very strictly followed, and so we can mm, we can understand that grief was more likely a common knowledge to be engaged with, and Arjuna, I mean, Arjuna's Nitya Siddha, but he's playing the role of a human being. In this pastime, you can see he is very much consciously aware of his grief. He's not avoiding it. He's not bypassing. He's not doing any of those things. He's engaging. I mean, in this verse that I read, he's engaging in bargaining. He's trying to fix it in a material way. And then Krishna points out that the grief in of itself is misplaced. You got to change your consciousness. Okay, moving on. I will bring up another verse that to show that grief is actually directly related to the pastime in which we are reading today also. So Diti's desire for vengeance against Indra is actually catalyzed by her grief. She's experiencing grief. And we see this in the same chapter, um, Canto 6, chapter 18, verse 23. Where is it? So I'll read the translation. Sri Shukadev Goswami said, just to help Indra, Lord Vishnu killed the two brothers Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. Because of their being killed, their mother, Diti, overwhelmed with lamentation and anger, contemplated as follows. So here we see the same Sanskrit word shoka, that it's actually used as a compound here, shoka deeptena, and Prabhupada translates it as lamentation. And then in other places, shoka, Prabhupada translates as grief. Deeptina is like ignited within, like a fire inside or a light inside emanating out. So this um, Prabhupada translates in this verse as kindled by lamentation. So we could also say that DT's desire for vengeance is kindled by grief, or ignited and brought about through her material grief. And what is that grief? She lost her sons. She had two sons, Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu, and Vishnu killed them. And so she's experiencing intense grief at the loss of her sons, and it's misplaced, which is the whole theme of this class, right? Her grief is there, but it was misplaced. Um, so moving on to today's verse, um, Kashyapa Muni had integrity, and he doesn't want to violate the promise to his wife. He wants to fulfill his promise to give her a benediction, but he also doesn't want to hurt others based on DT's misplaced grief. And so his solution is to engage DT in service, in devotional service. Um, he knows that if DT engages in devotional service, the material desires in her heart will be purified, and the desire for vengeance will diminish and hopefully disappear. So I'll now discuss some of the points in the purport of today's verse by Srila Prabhupada. He talks about purification through the process of Krishna consciousness. So I want to preface what I'll say with the fact that if we are chanting Hare Krishna sincerely, seriously, and we don't give it up, but also if we make very little to no effort for introspection, we will still make progress in Krishna consciousness, and we still have shelter. Krishna will still give us shelter, and we will still make progress in Krishna consciousness in terms of elevating our consciousness and having simultaneous purification. However, having said that, it helps to understand the process. It helps to look inward and engage with Krishna in our heart in the process. If we don't do that, um, we have the risk of the process taking much longer than necessary. Um, we have the risk of there being much more friction than is necessary, and there's every chance of us being distracted or giving up along the way. We might get frustrated and we might want to give up along the way. And so I highly encourage us to engage introspectively in the process of Krishna consciousness, to understand the inner process of the purification. We won't understand all the details, that's not possible, but if we are engaged with being curious to know about the process internally, Krishna reciprocates, and he will show you glimpses of what he's doing and glimpses of what he would like you to do to further engage with him, to reciprocate with him. So the whole process of Krishna consciousness really is to purify our desires. It's due to our desires to enjoy separate from Krishna that we are here, that we have material consciousness, that we have a material body. In Sanskrit, in the Bhagavatam, this is labeled as swa icha, the self-desire, desire of the soul. And process of Krishna consciousness is to cleanse those desires, to transfer selfish desires into serving Krishna, loving Krishna. And ideally, that really requires us to know what's inside. I mean, how are you going, as I said with the preface, the purification will happen automatically. However, there's some caveats to that. But anyway, my point is, how will you really change your desires if you don't even know what they are? If you are chock full of selfish material desires and you're completely unconscious and unaware of what they are, yes, they will gradually be purified, but it helps a lot to actually know, to have some conscious awareness of what they are, what's going on inside. And that requires some introspection, which is an austerity of the mind. Um, this is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita. Uh, Bhagavad Gita, chapter 17, verse 16. And satisfaction, simplicity, gravity, self-control, and purification of one's existence are the austerities of the mind. And the word in this uh, verse that I want to point out, it's a compound word. It's bhava samshuddhir. Bhava samshuddhi. Okay, so samshuddhi is comprehensive, complete purification of something. And bhava in this verse is referring to one's nature. Prabhupada translates this as purification of one's existence is an austerity of the mind. So basically, part of the subtle austerities of the mind is the purification of the subtle body. And that really is lubricated and pushed along very nicely if we are engaging in some introspection. It helps to know thyself in order to change thyself. And there's examples of this throughout Srimad Bhagavatam, and members of our sampradaya in particular. For example, Brahma heard the words tapa, which can be translated as fire. There was no one in the universe. He was by himself. He didn't know what his duty was. He didn't know what his activities were to be. So what did he do? He meditated. He looked inside. which is brings about some friction. It brings about some fire. It's very purifying. It's an austerity of the mind. Vyasadeva also is another example. He wrote all the Vedas and he was dissatisfied and he didn't know why. So what did he do? He meditated. He looked inwardly in introspection to understand what it is that was bringing about his dissatisfaction. And then Narada came to help him. And Narada also engages in this introspection when he explains the history of his previous life. Um, he left home and he wandered around and he engaged in chanting and meditating and looking inward. And uh, he gives the history of looking inward. One time he actually had darshan of Krishna. Krishna came to him and then explained to him that would be the first and last time he would see him in that lifetime. Um, okay, so in the verse today, in the purport, Prabhupada brings up the first words of the Shikshastakam prayer, which is Cheto Darpanam Marjanam. Prabhupada translates this as cleansing of the mirror of the heart. And I'd like to break this down and look at this a little closer. So, marjanam means to cleanse something, similar to our word in the Bhagavad Gita that we just mentioned, samshuddhihi, cleanse thoroughly. So, marjanam is to cleanse. Darpanam is a looking glass, a reflective surface, ideally for us in the modern age, that is a mirror. And then Cheto refers to the chitta, the inner consciousness, the consciousness that pervades the inner subtle body. So according to Sankhya philosophy, the chitta, which in in our verse that we were referencing is Cheto Darpanam Marjanam. The chitta is threefold. It has three aspects, which is basically the subtle body. It's the mind, the material intelligence, and the material ego. So our consciousness as a soul is first permeated through the chitta, through the subtle body. And this chitta, which permeates the subtle body, is often illustrated as a shiny surface, a mirror, or a lake. So the how do I say this? Okay, so let's give the lake example. So if we are a spirit soul and we are inside our body, our gross body, and inside our subtle body, and if we're constantly looking outward, we'll never obviously see Krishna in our heart. I mean, Krishna might be very kind to us and reveal himself by intense mercy, but generally speaking, if we're just constantly always looking outside of ourselves, we'll never see Paramatma within us. Um, and then the chitta, let's say with the example of the lake, for example. So if a lake has lots of turbulence in it, if there's lots of ripples, and if there's lots of contaminants in it, it will not be transparent. You can't see through it. And so even if you engage in introspection and there's tons of impurities inside, you will not see through to see yourself and see Krishna also in your heart. That's where engaging in chanting Hare Krishna is there, and engaging in the process of Krishna consciousness. That chitta, that's well, the subtle body will become cleansed. So the lake example, there'll be less ripples and there will be less contaminants inside. And when the lake is more transparent, when you engage in introspection, you will see yourself as a pure spirit soul and your relationship with Krishna. That is done by chant in this day and age by chanting Hare Krishna. And then the other example is the mirror. So if the mirror is covered in dust, you won't be able to see yourself in it. You won't be able to see Krishna sitting next to you in your heart, next to you. Um, First of all, if you're always looking out, you're not going to see. But then by chanting Hare Krishna, by engaging in the process, and also ideally by engaging in introspection to mm, facilitate and lubricate, so to speak, the process, it's a little bit easier. And the mirror will become cleansed. And that way, when we introspect, we'll be able to see Krishna, we'll be able to see our true selves with all of our impurities and all of our frailties, but we'll also see ourselves as pure spirit souls, and we'll be able to see Krishna with us, engaging with us internally. So Cheto Darpana Marjanam. Um, I brought that up because it's in Prabhupada, the purport and engaging in mm, introspection is extremely helpful to facilitate this process. And when I say facilitate the process, it's actually reciprocation with Krishna. It's quite personal, it's quite deep, quite mysterious. Um, so let's see what else we got. In my experience of engaging with the grief, the more we are conscious of the grief, the more we willingly surrender and engage with it instead of avoiding it. It actually and accepting our position of being mortal, then we actually see ourselves in connection with Krishna as pure spirit souls. Um, Engaging with the grief has actually been very helpful in cultivating my relationship with Krishna. Um, I wanted to bring up one more one more thing. Um, so in my meditations on this related to grief, I found this really interesting purport by Srila Prabhupada. Um, Give me 1 second to pull it up. This is Canto 6, the Hamsaguriya prayers, Canto 6, chapter 4, verse 27. Now, this is related to grief, and I'll present a little, mm, a little philosophical logic experiment. So, it's inevitable that we experience grief in this world, but then where do we repose that grief into? How do we purify it into a spiritual, um, in a spiritual way? Um, if we're just ignoring it, and if we don't know anything about it, it still remains, just like our subtle body. If we have no knowledge of it, it doesn't help us. Um, it remains and it carries us as from one body to the next, as Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita. And grief is pretty uncomfortable. It's an unpleasant process, or it can be. And generally speaking, you could translate it as material misery. And if we're ignoring it, that doesn't necessarily help us. And I'll show you um, so in this verse that I mentioned in the purport, Prabhupada quotes a verse from the Vishnu Purana. It's Hladini Sandhini Samvit Twai Twai Eka Sarva Samstitao Hlada Tapakari Mishra Twai no Guna Varjite. So this verse is explaining that Krishna has three main spiritual potencies. The Hladini Shakti, which is the pleasure potency, which personified is Srimati Radharani herself. Sandhini is eternal existence. Samvit is consciousness, eternal consciousness, and knowledge. And this verse is explaining that all these exist in Krishna, and Krishna is 100% pure, pure spirit, nothing material about him. And then Prabhupada in this purport gives a very wonderful explanation of the third line, Tlada Tapa Kari Mishra. So Prabhupada explains, in the material world, the spiritual energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is manifested as Tapa Kari, which means, quote, causing miseries, end quote. Everyone hankers for happiness, but although happiness originally comes from the pleasure potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in the material world, because of material activities, the pleasure potency of the Lord becomes a source of miseries. Lada Tapa Kari. This is really fascinating because it's explained that Lada, the Hladini potency, the pleasure giving potency, the pure pleasure potency, in the material world is inverted and reflected and causes misery. Tapa is misery, Kari is cause. So the pleasure potency, the pure pleasure potency actually causes misery, material misery in the material world. And then Mishra is mixed. So it actually causes mixtures of pleasure and misery. But I found this really interesting and related to grief, because actually, if we consciously engage in our mm, material misery in grief in service to Krishna, that's a huge important clause to keep in mind, that it's the purpose is to come closer to Krishna. If we engage in that way, that can actually bring us closer to him because we're not avoiding Radharani. So I'll give a simple logical thought experiment here. So Hladini, pleasure potency, is A. A causes B, material misery, right? Material misery is B. So pleasure potency reflected, or let's say inverted, in material consciousness causes material misery. So one, if we completely ignore, repress, or cover B, then we are actually um, avoiding Hladini. We're actually avoiding pleasure potency. And we're actually just deeper in ignorance. So if we avoid the material misery, we are avoiding the cause of that material misery, which is actually pure pleasure potency, Srimati Radharani herself. So then also, if we think under false ego that we are the causes of B, we are the causes of our misery, then we see our grief, we're aware of the grief, but we stay stuck because false ego is the last and most formidable barrier to spiritual consciousness, pure Krishna consciousness. So if we engage with the material misery, if we acknowledge it, but we are covered over by our false ego and we think we are the causes of the material misery, we are the receivers of the material misery, then still that's a step forward, but it's also blocking us from the cause of material misery, which is actually Hladini. And so, third option, and the most ideal, is if we diminish our false ego and see our connection to Krishna, then we see our grief or misery, B, as caused by A, Hladini, and then it actually becomes a pleasure. So when we diminish our ego and we willingly engage in the quote unquote material misery, the grief, we actually come closer to Hladini. And theoretically, it's kind of, if I had a board or a diagram, it'd probably be a little easier to see what I'm trying to say here, but I didn't have time or facilities to do that, so please forgive me. But if my point is that engaging in our karma, engaging in our lot here with diminished ego, brings us closer to the Plotinee potency. We are not ignoring it, we're not ignoring her, and we try to engage in Plotinee potency in the mood of service, then what appears as material misery can actually be a source of pleasure. So that's all I had to share. I apologize if it was an overload of information. Um, yeah, if anybody has anything they want to share, any comments, questions, corrections. All right, well, James. Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare
Krishna Prabhu.
Hare, Harika, Hare Krishna.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you for a nice class. Well prepared, full of interesting um, concepts and lots of nice information to contemplate. I, I think a lot about issue of grief. Um, you were speaking a little about how grief can be a catalyst in Krishna consciousness, and I know that's certainly been the case for myself. Um, Starting early in my Krishna consciousness, um, upon hearing that that one could um, deliver one's um, family members by becoming Krishna conscious. Srila Prabhupada describes that 7 generations before and after can all be liberated by one's practice of Krishna consciousness. This was very inspiring to me. I had a very special relationship with my father, extremely kind to me. He had great love for me, and I felt great love for him. And throughout my life from a very young age, I dreaded the thought of one day losing him.
Mm,
It was uh, a serious preoccupation for me. And hearing that it would be possible uh, to benefit him by my practice of Krishna consciousness, it became a great incentive for me
mm,
in my Krishna consciousness, and it motivated me for all the years of my devotional service. And even to this day, and it's been many years since his passing, I've lost all of my family members. My only sibling passed away relatively early. My mother passed away, and finally my father passed away. All of my other relatives passed away. It's the entire family, extended family, everybody passed away. I'm the only person left. Um, but to this day, the thought of being able to benefit my family members, many of whom were very dear to me, is it still serves as a great incentive, and it's the concept is something which Srila Prabhupada promoted amongst his disciples. There are many instances in which he advised his disciples that they could they could benefit their family members by their practice of Krishna consciousness. There's one letter in particular in which I was trying to find it, I couldn't find it, but he describes very vividly one devotee that I think he was speaking of her mother that she could be assured that her mother would go back home by her own practice of Krishna consciousness, uh, that all of his disciples, their parents would be benefited uh, by their child's practice of Krishna consciousness. And to this day, that remains a great uh, source of solace and a powerful motivator for me in my
mm,
Krishna consciousness.
mm,
Anyway, I just thought I would mention that.
mm,
Um, I've benefited tremendously from that understanding. It has been such a strong motivational force that it has um, I've made a great deal of advancement simply by that motivation that it has driven me on in spite of all kinds of challenges
mm.
and difficulties, and perpetuated my Krishna consciousness for decades. So um, what was ordinarily a source of misery has become something beneficial both to myself and my family members.
Mm.
Everything transformed wonderfully in Krishna consciousness. That's all I got. Thanks again. Hare Krishna.
Thank you for sharing something so personal as well. Yeah, I appreciate that. Sounds like you had a very wonderful, deep connection with your father, and even at an early on, you anticipated and feared the loss of that relationship, and then later on, that greatly enhanced your determination to engage in Krishna consciousness to benefit him and the others as well. That's really nice. I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. And Kiara sent a message in the chat. Hare Krishna. She says it makes her feel less that introspection is self-indulgent. Granted, you're using it to focus on serving better. Yeah, that's nice. Literally anything can be used or misused in Krishna consciousness. So introspection could be misused. Extroversion could be misused. Literally anything. Austerity can be misused. Um, yeah, I hope that was. I hope this was knowledge, knowledgeable, benefiting for you. Hare Krishna. Anybody else have anything they want to discuss? It's 8:05. I'm guessing the doors are opening. We're opening soon. If nobody has anything else, we could end here. Okay. If nobody has anything else, I shall end here then. I appreciate everyone joining. I hope class was beneficial. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and a nice weekend. Hare Krishna.